it, but I'm going to put...
As soon as they saw you, see. Friends, good evening. Welcome to JW3, the home for Jewish culture and conversation. And a special welcome, as always, to the wonderful Shoah survivors, Holocaust survivors, who honor us, as always, with your presence when you come here. So it's a real honor to have you in the audience here this evening. Okay, the housekeeping out of the way first. There are more people that have booked places than there are people in the room, which means there are people that are going to be arriving late. We don't want anybody to miss the event, so with your permission, actually even without your permission, we're going to let them in, but we will do it as quietly as we can. What will help is if you're sitting in a row and the empty seat is in the middle, that means we'll be squeezing someone along and stepping on your toe. So if you have that chance to just shuffle along and leave an empty seat nearer the edge, the ushers will find it easier and disturb you less. And then the other bit of housekeeping, as always, please, if you haven't turned your phone on silent or turned it off, now's your chance to do so. No one likes that blue glare in their face from the person in front of them. Feel free to take photos if that's all right with you both, but just keep your flash off your camera if you're taking any pictures. Okay, that's the housekeeping down. Now we can settle down. Okay, so for those that don't know me, my name is Raymond Simonson. It's my great privilege to be the CEO of JW3. It's actually my privilege to have been the CEO of this wonderful organization since we first opened our doors over 10 years ago. Now, almost 8 years ago, I was standing on this very stage, about to kick off a major conference of international Jewish journalists and thinkers and writers. And just before I was about to come on stage, the news broke that the great writer, activist, humanitarian, Nobel Prize laureate and Shoah survivor, Elie Wiesel, zichrono livracha, had died at his home in New York. And I had to get up on this stage and scrap the speech I was going to give, and instead I needed to announce to this room, a packed audience, that he had passed away. And the shocked and distraught reaction from this capacity audience was visceral. And these were, as I say, journalists and writers and thinkers and rabbis in this room. And it really stayed with me, their reaction. Over the past 222 days now, since the heinous terrorist attacks in Israel on October 7th, I've stood on this stage and other stages many times to address both Jewish and non-Jewish groups, as part of our efforts often to help raise the profile of the hostages kidnapped by Hamas. Most of these audiences I've spoken to have included family members of the hostages. And each time I write something new and something fresh. But each time, no matter what I write, I find myself including the same words of Elie Wiesel that I read out to the audience at that conference on the day he died. Lines that I'm sure you all know. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. Within the Jewish community, we all talk about and we think about and we pray for those hostages every single day. But it often feels like outside of the community, they've been forgotten. A news story from last October, and the indifference is deafening. We also talk about and think about and worry about the ongoing rising levels of antisemitism that we see everywhere. And again, the indifference from too many is deafening. Indifference. So in the face of that indifference, we at JW3 have redoubled our efforts to hold community, to raise the profile of the hostages, to counter anti-Semitism where we can, to create spaces for meaningful conversations, and to help strengthen proud Jewish identities. So when our good friends Joanna and Stuart Riley contacted me to say that their friend Elisha Wiesel was coming to London, and might we want to see if he would come to JW3 to give a talk, we jumped at the opportunity. We are so honoured, Elisha, that you have generously given your time to be with us today. And I'm very grateful to you, Karen, the CEO of the incredible Holocaust Education Trust, who's kindly agreed to join us to be in conversation with Elisha. We'll start with them in conversation, and we will have time for questions and conversation at the end. At that point, we'll raise the lights a bit and we'll bring some microphones around for you. So friends, please give a warm welcome to Karen Pollock and Elisha Wiesel.
Thank you very much, Ray, and thank you all for being here. And Elisha, welcome. It's really a privilege to have this opportunity to interview you or to have a conversation with you. But I think I speak on behalf of everybody here. It is a real honor to have you here and to have this opportunity. I should say as well, I think that it says something, a testament really, to you and also the legacy of your father, that we have a number of Holocaust survivors here. Holocaust survivors who I have the privilege to know very well, but who I know had such high regard for your father. Elisha, there is so much that I would like to ask you, and there's so much that I think we all would want to hear from you. But we talked beforehand, and we said, actually, let's not stick to the questions I've got written down. Let's make it organic. So I can't even see what's written down anymore. But I think that what I'd like to do is try and talk a bit about your father and his legacy, but then move on very much to the current times and the role that you're playing, if that's okay.
It's amazing. Nobody's ever asked me about my father.
What?
It's like
Amazing. And by the way, actually, when Ray said, he jumped at the chance of getting you here, similarly, when he messaged me to say, would I consider, I think he had an immediate reply from me saying, yes, 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 because it is such an honor. But let's start with talking about your father. What I'd be interested to ask you about to start with maybe is just to tell us a bit about Elie Wiesel, the man, the father, the man you grew up with, rather than Elie Wiesel, the man that we all know, and I think we all probably have read Night and many other of his writings, and we'll all remember when we've read that. But let's hear a bit about the person himself, the man himself.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thanks to all of you for having me here. There's something special when you travel across the world and you come to a place and you see that row of locks so lovingly inscribed on that bridge walking into JW3. And after having spent the day with many people in not necessarily a Jewish context, all of a sudden you see something like that. You see the care and love, and you feel a little bit like you're home. So I really had a very powerful, moving moment walking in here. And I want to thank you for everything that this place is, that it represents, and for including me in it this evening. My father was obviously a presence on the world stage. I often think about my father through the lens of Torah a little bit. There's the written Torah, which we have written down from Har Sinai, where Moshe wrote down what God told him. My father, too, has his written Torah, all of his speeches which have been videotaped or transcripted, all of his books. He's left behind a massive corpus of his knowledge, what he thought about so many things. If you want to know what Elie Wiesel thought about the Palestinians in Gaza, or if you want to know what he thought about Soviet Jewry, or if you wanted to know what he thought about Voltaire and Sartre, there's probably a piece that you can find and learn about. I think I'm here to tell you maybe a little bit more about my father's oral Torah, right? The Torah that was just transmitted in person by those who had the pleasure to get to know him and see him up close and personal. And that Torah was all about derech eretz. It was all about how he treated other human beings. You could have situations where he would give a lecture and 20 or 30 or maybe even 100 people would be lining up. Everybody had a story they wanted to tell him. Did you know so-and-so from Seagate? I'm also from Seagate. Did you know somebody from this place? I have to tell you about something my daughter did the other day. So many little stories or questions that people wanted to connect on, and I saw my father take the time for everyone. And even as he did that, even as he led a life on the world stage, even as he was a teacher to his students, he always made me feel like I was central. And he did it in a way that was without placing too much of a burden on me. He went out of his way to not teach me about the Holocaust until considerably later in my childhood.
That's interesting, because one of the things I wanted to ask you was about being second generation. whether that was something that, what was the turning point for you to decide, actually, I want to carry this legacy, I want to talk about it, and I recognize I have a role? Was it something that you felt not burdened by, or that your father had put upon you, but was it something that you always thought, this is what I'm destined to do? Or was it something actually you thought, I know about it, it's part of my history, but actually I'm going to devise my own direction, and that's not for me?
I had other ideas as a kid growing up. I have conversations that I can almost say I wish I could take back, but maybe not, because often the resolution from conflict is what's meaningful in creating a synthesis. But I went to an Orthodox yeshiva, a modern Orthodox yeshiva, for 14 years of my life. And I was continually surrounded by teachers, fellow students. Everybody would always look at me, and they didn't see me, they saw my father. And they would always be, wanting to just engage with the part of me that was the son of Elie Wiesel. And I had a very bad reaction to that. I went as far as I could for a little while, from Yiddishkeit, from things that are Jewish, from Holocaust memory. I remember having, arguments with my parents where I would say, everything you want me to do, I want to do the opposite. You want me to be Jewish? Guess what? I think I might want to be Buddhist. You want me to do, so-and-so? I think I want to do the opposite. And this was, I was 18 years old. I was just off to college. I had a big spiky purple mohawk and a leather jacket, and I played electric guitar and heavy metal and punk rock. And
this is when we get the photos on screen.
I have the photos. We're not showing them. So I wanted to go in radically different directions. And, I think that in the same way that my father, after the war, was very distant from God, was very distant from a lot of things, I too had my own path back. And there were several turning points. If I had to point to one, it was probably a trip that I took with my father and my cousin, Steve, to Siget, my father's hometown. I think that was really a turning point for me, to see the place, not where Jews had died. We also went to Auschwitz in that trip. But to be in a place where Jews had lived, where 10,000 Jews had disappeared overnight, and you could still see the spots of the mezuzot in the doorway where the mezuzahs had been removed. You could still see where the shuls were in disrepair. You could sense that a community had been here. I could see the bedroom where my aunt had lived. She was killed at age 9, sent to the gas chambers. And it all became more personal as I was with my father, and all of a sudden, I stopped seeing him as a weak person who had been a victim, and I started actually almost hearing the radio broadcast. It was like walking around with a human radio transmitter who could see things that none of the rest of us could see. And that was a very powerful moment for me. It wasn't the only one, but it was a powerful moment.
How old were you?
I was 22.
Okay. And it's interesting when you talk about seeing where Jews lived rather than where Jews were murdered, and understanding the life and the community that thrived. When, I'm sure, this is quite common practice now, but when we take young people to visit Auschwitz, we take, as you know, we take thousands every year. We go to Oswiecim first, and we stand in the space where the great synagogue was. We go to the market square and talk about the hustle and bustle of business before the war. And these things are so important because they need to somehow, we want people to understand Jewish life that was eradicated, not just way of life, not just the fact that lives were murdered. And it's quite a difficult thing to sort of convey, because often you're going now to places that are empty. They are void of any Jewish life whatsoever.
And this is part of the problem with Holocaust education, I think, to get into your territory a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's no more outspoken thinker on this topic. How many people in this room have read People Love Dead Jews by Dara Horn? Has anybody read that book?
Yeah.
I don't see that many hands. This is a book people should read. She goes very deep into this concept of Holocaust education. It's like, how could we possibly have anti-Semitism today? We've had Holocaust education, but Holocaust education is all about some people died, it was very bad. It doesn't really focus on what do living Jews look like? What did they look like at the time? What do they look like now? There's something we're not quite getting right there.
And that leads me on to an area I wanted to ask you about. So what I remember, I think about lots of things that Elie Wiesel stood for, but I very much took from his stance that he didn't only speak out about Jews and about Israel and about anti-Semitism. He wanted us to understand about, justice. And I feel that, he spoke out for other genocides, other events that we should actually concern ourselves with. And there's often this debate about what is the purpose of Holocaust education. Is it so that people know it happened? Is it so that people understand anti-Semitism? Is it so that we eradicate anti-Semitism today? Is it so that we make the world a better place? From your point of view, what's your experience, and what do you think really the purpose is? And going back to that question, has it failed, or what should we be doing differently? And we are obviously going to come to more current events and current challenges that I think raise more questions. But even as a concept, Holocaust education in the UK, it's been on the curriculum since 1991. You're going to find a lot of people who really do know what the Holocaust was. They understand it. But whether they, as a result, understand the relationship between the past and Israel, the past and Jewish life today, is another question.
I was just talking about this with a few friends that I met, this evening before this conversation, and I was, it's an entry point into explaining why I actually did not like the play Leopoldstadt by Tom Stoppard.
Okay.
I didn't like it. I didn't like it when I read it. That's why I didn't go see it. Because here I was just reading a book by someone who, in theory, had learned the lesson of Holocaust education. It was really bad. People suffered. And I looked to see what he had taken away from it. Did he have any thought of what the extinction of the Jewish people through assimilation could mean? He treats it a little bit. Was there any moment in the book where Zionism was going to be treated seriously as, the only meaningful political movement that could guarantee a second Holocaust would occur? Zero. So I saw a lot of this, we've talked about the Holocaust, like I guess I checked my box on education against anti-Semitism. I guess I've checked the box as a newly discovered Jew that I didn't know I was before. I think that that's, some of the gap here. And there is a direction I want to answer with your question, which is my father believed firmly in bringing two things together that are not at odds with each other: universalism and particularism. My father believed in his bones that if other human beings were suffering and he could do something about it, that he had an obligation, and it didn't matter if they were Jewish or not. This was a human thing we needed to do. And in general, to be engaged with the world is a positive activity, not to cloister ourselves away, not just on the axis of compassion, but on the axis of knowledge. My father's bookshelf is a living testimony to that. You have Sartre and Voltaire and the greats of Western civilization right alongside the Talmud. But my father also deeply believed in particularism. He believed that to be the most effective advocate he could be in the universal stage, to be the best thought partner he could be in an exchange of knowledge or ideas with other cultures, he had to know his own. And he had to know where he came from. And he had to have the sense of generations that had come before him and would still come after. Being Jewish anchored him in time.
I mean, the question of universalism and particularism is one that many of us in the Holocaust education field grapple with. And part of the challenge is that I understand exactly what you're articulating, but for a teacher in a classroom, it might be that they want to teach about the Holocaust because they want young people to go away understanding that, bad things happen to a certain group of people, but they can happen to anyone.
Sure.
And, that's often this, the line we're trying to sort of tread with care.
And that's a lesson also well taken. It's just insufficient.
Indeed.
Yeah. It's insufficient because the Jewish people, we have our own story to tell. We have our own story to tell that it transcends the Holocaust. You have to look at the timeline. You have to look at, my God, we've been hated almost since we were around. Like we've been hated, shortly after, after the Roman Empire, we're blamed for killing God. In later years, we're blamed for all sorts of things. There's a long arc to it that isn't just about the Holocaust. And there's also many things that the Jewish people have brought to civilization. I think that for young people to engage and have a chance to fight anti-Semitism, they need to not understand also that we were the world's most notable victims, but also the contributions that we've made in every society that would take us, where we had the ability to put down roots. And I have one last topic I want to address before you get to your next question within this. So much and thank you for giving me this soapbox to stand on and shout my political ideas. So much of the flaws in Western thinking, I think at the moment, that have infected the academy, come down to the sense of the world is a zero-sum game. That if I'm winning, you're losing. It's a very Marxist idea. The West defeated communism, but did we really? Because it sort of seems like the ghost of communism escaped and infected the minds of faculty at pretty much every major university out there. And you have an entire world of people thinking zero-sum. So if the Jews are doing something good or they're winning, they must have done something wrong. But our way has always been the way of working to make everything around us better. That's the sort of thing that also has to be understood about Jewish contributions, not just the Holocaust.
And let's talk a bit about, I suppose it's a continuation of that. It's about Jewish existence and Jewish identity. I was saying to you earlier that I think, you know, if I was to ask you, well, if we were to have this conversation pre-October the 7th about what your identity is and how you assert it and how one asserts their relationship to Israel and as a Jew, I would imagine it would be similar, but definitely there would be a difference pre-October the 7th and post. So for example, I'm wearing my Bring Them Home dog tag every day, something I wouldn't have worn before, and people sometimes ask me what it is, and I explain what it is. And I'm happy to do so, but I'm doing it also slightly defiantly. So if I'm doing a media interview, I'm wearing it, right? And similarly, I'm not wearing my yellow ribbon, but I often do for the same reason. I suppose I wonder for you what has changed personally. I read something about you, for example, I think we were, I can't remember which station, but was it Central Station?
No, Moynihan Station.
Yeah, right, there you go. So maybe you can tell us that story about with the Israeli flag, but also just for you, what has changed, but also what do you think has changed for us as Jews, like how we are identifying and how should we be navigating this changed world?
Boy, what a profound question. I'm sure that it's one that everybody in this room is grappling with. It's a question of time and focus, as with almost everything in life. The feelings that I had about being Jewish, or the feelings that I had about the state of Israel, or the feelings that I had about how the hater's gonna hate, all of those things were true October 6th, and they're still true after October 7th. The one thing that has changed is how much time and focus I choose to give to this issue. I certainly did it before. I put together a rally in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 2021 when the bombs were, the rockets were being launched from Gaza, Israel was retaliating, and already people were, rioting in the streets, calling, attacking Jews in the streets of the United States, calling us genocidal, all sorts of terrible lies and inflammatory anti-Semitism. And I put together a rally against anti-Semitism, and I got my first real taste of Jewish communal work. Boy, it's not easy. So kudos to everybody who does it. Immediately I tried to create a tent, and I thought I was going to create a pretty straightforward tent. I was going to basically say, no racists, no one-staters. Basically like to come, you cannot be a racist calling for the expulsion of Arabs or the destruction of Arabs, nor can you be a one-stater who says the state of Israel has no right to exist and we need to dismantle it. I thought those would be pretty broad tent poles. And of course, what I discovered is that, wow, you know what? I hate to tell you, just so you guys know, we have, unfortunately, a few racists in our community. There are people who actually do say things that, like Kahana used to say, which my father couldn't stand. My father was in direct opposition to Mayor Kahana and his way of thinking. And we also have people, too many of them, unfortunately, by a country mile, that are saying things like the state of Israel should not exist as a Zionist enterprise, everything will be fine, let's just have one democratic state, there'll no longer be a Jewish majority, but don't worry, we'll all be fine. We don't need an IDF. In trying to create that, I got a sense of just how much work we have to do to establish a strong, vibrant center. Because within those polls, there's a million things we can agree on and a million things we can disagree on. We can disagree on any specific policy. We can disagree on whether or not settlements have a purpose, because ultimately we have Israeli Arab villages in Israel, so why couldn't we have Jewish villages in what might become a future Palestine? Or you could say they're absolutely hateful and they're in the way of a two-state solution. You could say that we rely too much on the US or we rely too little on the US. There's so many things you can disagree on, but if you believe that Israel needs to exist as a democratic Jewish majority state, I was opening that tent. So that was like my first experience. And then I said, I'm never going to do this again.
I was about to say, like,
I am never going to do this again
you
because
survived it. Like what?
I've never encountered so much hatred in my life as I encountered, in the process of doing that from Jews, mind you.
Yeah.
I think that after October 7th, the thing that changed is it's not an option. Jewish leadership is not just something that we can delegate to a few chosen organizations and their leaders. Jewish leadership is every single one of us looking at our skill set, our network, our background, our practice, our observance, every aspect of it, and thinking, where can I go deeper? How am I commuting to the next generation? How am I going to influence people around me? Those are the sorts of things that I think we all need to be thinking about, and we can no longer delegate this.
It's very, I think that's really speaks.
That's the most empowering thing I'm going to say all night, so how about a clap?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think that speaks to all of us, because I think that actually I see that here. You can see people who are writing, they are prolific in their writing in a way that they weren't previously. They would sometimes dip in, but now this is something they write about the whole time.
Think about Alexander Hamilton, right? Has anybody seen the play Hamilton? Or at least listen to the soundtrack?
Yeah.
The part where he's writing all the letters in favor of the Constitution. That's what we got to be doing.
Exactly.
We got to be like Alexander Hamilton. We got to be writing. We got to be speaking. Have that kind of insane level of energy. Like, this is it. This is a moment where we are in the docket of the world's court, and we have to, unfortunately, once again, assert ourselves. And it's not just our enemies that I'm talking about. It's our children. Our children are watching this moment.
Yeah, it's like, and let's talk a bit about, we were talking earlier about university campuses. I asked you about, can you just share your reflections about what's going on in the US, because it's something that it's not mirroring here yet, but actually it's slowly getting there, but there's a model that British universities and certain, protesters are witnessing and thinking about.
It's just starting to happen. I want to ask you a question. I want to intervene for a moment.
Go on.
So I have
it's more than starting.
I have a T-shirt
Yeah.
with an Israeli flag on it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I walk around in New York just wearing my Israeli flag. You know what? Just to because I feel like it. If I did that through central London, would I get hit, provoked, aggressed, stabbed, shot?
I think it would be regarded as provocative, would you? Which seems, what do people think? You can do a show of hands. Provocative?
I think England is further along than the US. I don't think you're behind. I think you're further along.
Well, I was asking specifically about the university campuses, where I think there is a bit of a difference. But maybe you're right. Look, I think in terms of anti-Semitic incidents, I think we're pretty at a level nearing 140, 150% in both increase in both countries. And by the way, I don't think wearing a Magen David or wearing a Israeli flag should be provocative. This is the challenge now that we're in. It's regarded, it goes back to your zero-sum game. It's like you're with us or you're against us now. There's no nuance. Those discussions, those dialogues and conversations aren't really happening, or far less than we would like. But give me a bit of your reflections on what is going on US campuses, because certainly I think from my point of view, witnessing it was very shocking, and there was a fear that we were going to see the same here, and we have seen some things. There are things going on in certain universities, but for example, I don't know, Birmingham, they've come down quite hard on the protesters.
I'm glad to hear that.
They've been clear about what is or isn't acceptable, but some are, prevaricating, and I think we've seen a lot of that.
University administrations have failed their students in the United States. Full stop. They have failed them on every level. They failed the protesters too. They're failing young people as an entire class, because the protesters are getting the message that they can get away with this behavior in real life. And by the way, I don't think they're going to be able to get away with that behavior in real life. So they're not learning the lesson they need. Yeah. Jewish students are taking away that they are the only vulnerable population that isn't going to be protected. Can you imagine for a second people screaming hate speech against black Americans and the university not squashing it, or against the LGBTQ community, or against every other community that Jewish students have stood with, and now when it's our turn, we're abandoned? It's absolutely an abdication of leadership. And I will tell you this, universities can make a decision. They can either decide that they are going to be completely balanced and not speak on any issue at all, and they're simply going to enforce rules consistently, and I could see that. That's the University of Chicago model.
Yeah.
But every university, maybe with the exception of the University of Chicago, has gone ahead and opined on everything, whether it's George Floyd, whether it's legislation on LGBTQ rights, whether it's a woman's right to choose. There almost isn't anything they haven't opined on that's on the liberal agenda. And guess what? They're not speaking up for Jewish students. It's a crime.
I think we all agree with you. And so your advice to us and our British universities would be show leadership.
100%. Show leadership. You can enforce rules consistently. If we're going to allow hate speech, I'm not sure that that's the right idea, but okay, allow hate speech. And when somebody comes and wants to talk about an opinion that you don't like hearing, there's so many controversial issues, and people have all wanted safe spaces from controversy and many conservative opinions that they don't want to hear because it offends them. Okay, if you're going to be open for a free exchange of ideas, then be open to it and enforce that consistently, but that's not where they are. If you're going to start picking sides, then you better pick us as well, because we'll remember.
100%. Let me ask you something about, I'm mindful of the time and we're going to come to the audience shortly. I want to ask you something about advocacy, resilience, also strategy. There's going to be elections in the US, there are going to be elections here as well. Let's talk a bit about mobilization, talk about, earlier we were talking about, understandably, there is a sense of anxiety. Understandably, there is a feeling of sometimes of vulnerability. And those are natural feelings to have when you feel under threat. But also, we have a role to play. And I said to you earlier something about, we need to be clever. And you said something about, well, actually, I think being clever is a key part of, a consideration for us for our future. How are we, how are we operating in a way that can actually shift things? So do you want to maybe expand on that and maybe focus a bit on American politics as a starting point?
Yeah, easy question. I think I have to first establish a foundation on this issue. I have family in Israel who think I'm nuts for still being in the United States. They're like, how could you still be there? Look at what we see in these campuses. Like we have a place waiting for you. Like, it's Israel, come on. And of course, Israeli real estate, for those of us who follow and have been thinking about this possible option, Israeli real estate keeps ticking up. So there is a price to waiting, unfortunately. But my response is, God forbid that I should have to flee the United States of America in fear. My father was so proud to be an American citizen. He had such love for the country, such patriotism for everything it represented. I'll never forget one time when a flag-burning amendment was being considered, and I was in college, and I came back and I said, Dad, this is so cool, isn't it great that we live in a country where, burning the flag is legal because, it shows that, the concept is more powerful than the actual object of the flag? He got so upset with me. He said, it was the darkest he'd ever spoken to me. He said, if you knew what that flag meant when the liberators came at Buchenwald from the American army, carrying that flag, having lost their brothers in the battlefield to get to us, you would never say something so stupid at my dinner table again. So my father also had that side to him. He was a deep patriot. So God forbid I should give up on that country. Israel needs us to be strong there in the US too. So that's very foundational.
The challenge often is that we have a degree of despair when we witness whether it's, call it flip-flopping or whatever you like, but when you see stances change, people get nervous, and there becomes this question of, whether we can possibly make a difference. But I think if we give up, then we're definitely not going to make any difference whatsoever. So we have to find a way to make our voices heard, articulate what we think in a clear way, not always be screaming and shouting from the rooftops, just being, having a clear message. I wonder whether, from your point of view, when you look at the arguments now, particularly around delegitimization of Israel, anti-Zionism, people's understanding of what's actually even going on, do you feel that we've somehow failed and that we don't have enough people advocating and sharing the right message?
It's going to take an army of all of us. I don't think that this is a fight that we can just delegate to a couple of articulate people and say, oh, they've got this, don't worry. Each of us has to actually learn enough history to be literate. Each of us has to have enough emotional connection to what's going on in Israel to bring the passion, because I want to talk for a moment about techniques, if I can, because I think that this is very important. I think a lot about always what is it we're trying to accomplish, and then I always think about what is it, how are we trying to accomplish it. There are things I believe we need to learn from other communities. When the black community in America experienced the death of George Floyd and saw a black man with a cop's boot on his head, crushing him into the ground, they screamed with a voice that was heard around the world. And they said, no more. And they didn't rationally argue it. They didn't start opening up textbooks and making reason-based arguments for things the way so many in our community are always do, because we're Talmud Chachams, all of us. This is how we were raised, right? We want to reason. They screamed. And I think that we have to have the rational side, as you sort of allude to, in place. But I think we also have to have that emotional grounding that what is happening to us is not okay. And it has to stop. And people have to stop killing us and celebrating it and then saying, oh, well, the murderers had their reasons. No, not in this time. Not on our watch. We have to feel that.
Hear, hear. Final question before we go to the audience. When one of the things that I think about post-October the 7th, we talk about the Holocaust and previous episodes in our history as being something of a collective trauma. And I think a lot of us felt traumatized and still feel shaken to the core post-October the 7th. And having seen some of the footage and read some of the, heard from the witnesses, heard from families of hostages, you can't fail to just, it's visceral. But something that I find difficult is knowing that this has happened in the lifetime of Holocaust survivors, people who we feel have suffered the very worst. And I wonder if you've ever wondered how your father would consider what is happening today, what his response to this would be.
I have two parts to that answer. The first is, I think we have to cut ourselves a little bit of slack. I think we as a community were in shock. It's normal. I have a story, it's an embarrassing story, but if anybody else was in shock and it helps them feel better, I share it. When 9/11 happened, I was at work, my Wall Street office. The first plane hit, what happened? The second plane hit. All of a sudden, we all started realizing that this was a terrorist attack. And I was in shock. The way that I know that I was in shock is my sequence of reasoning was, they're coming for New York City. This is the end of the world. There are more planes headed. What should I do next? And I said, well, if it's the end of the world, I guess I should go to the bar and get a drink. Not proud of that moment.
That's what you did.
It was legitimate shock. And then I caught myself. I'm like, wait a second. Oh my God, I'm actually in shock. And then I realized I had a million things I needed to do, people I needed to check in on to see who were working in some of these buildings, to see if they were okay. All of a sudden, like, it came back to me. It's okay to have been in shock momentarily, but we need to recover from it. We had that moment. And what do I think my father would be thinking? He raised me with such love and with such confidence that I believe that as he is with me today, he's thinking, you've got this.
I think that, I don't know how to express it, but you really are carrying his legacy in a way that is really extraordinary. I think it must be extraordinarily difficult for me even asking you that question, to think, well, what would he think? But I imagine he would be immensely proud of the role that you are playing. And we are lucky that we have you standing up and speaking out and inspiring us in the way that you are. I mentioned to you earlier, but I just want to touch on it for the audience's sake as well, because I think it is a really fascinating story. The power of your father, his wisdom, and the way he was able to really cut through was shown to me many years ago. He was our guest speaker at the Holocaust Educational Trust anniversary dinner. I'm sorry, I don't remember which anniversary it was. I think 30 years maybe. And he was going to be speaking, I think we were at Banqueting House on Whitehall. And Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister at the time, and he heard that Elie Wiesel was going to be in London. This was the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed. And Gordon Brown's office called and asked, could we please go and see him before the dinner? And so I accompanied Elie Wiesel and our chairman, Greville Janner, and we went to number 10, and we stood in the state room where the cabinet usually sit. And Gordon asked your father questions about his reflections about what was going on. And I just remember witnessing this conversation and just thinking, isn't it remarkable? And I felt enormous pride, by the way, that that was what was happening. The fact that the Prime Minister wants to take literally time away from dealing with an enormous crisis to meet this man, this hero, was enough of something. But the fact that he wanted his wisdom, I think that that's a wonderful testament to Elie Wiesel, and I know that you must be proud of that, but I have to say that I think we also feel very privileged to have your wisdom tonight.
Well, I love that story. I love that story because you've just connected it to mine. You've now clearly evidenced that Gordon Brown was in shock.
We've got an opportunity to have questions. I imagine there are going to be loads. I could be wrong. I think there are 2 people with microphones on either side of the... oh, wow, we can see you now. There were people here. It wasn't just pitch black. If you want to raise your hand, and then somebody will bring the microphone over to you, and just to remind you to please ask a question. Oh, sorry, am I pointing? So there's somebody over there.
Is that you? Thank you very much for a really fabulous talk. It was really wonderful. And also, Karen, your questions were great as well.
By the way, it's Karen's birthday tonight, everybody.
Oh, it's not yet. It's not yet.
She's celebrating her birthday.
This is my party.
I wanted to ask you, I loved the idea of what you were saying about we almost need to become rabble-rousers because people are in disbelief. What is your view of the reasoning behind not releasing parts of the 45-minute film that was created from the Hamas terrorists, their footage? Because there obviously was logic and there obviously was respect for those that were tragically murdered. But you are asking us to become vocal. And that is around people that are in disbelief and do not believe us. And the other thing is my daughter is at Birmingham and she's having a really challenging time. So, but I wanted to ask you about the 45-minute film because only a select few of people have seen it. So that's my question.
First of all, thank you for the question. I can't second guess the people whose job it is to decide what images are so vulgar, so provocative, and so grotesque that they demean the memory of the dead more than they serve our political aim of getting people to understand what we went through. I can't even imagine the suffering that the parents and relatives of the dead and tortured are feeling. And I think we have an obligation to them as well, to the dignity of the dead. And I don't know the specifics of every decision that got made, but thank God I'm not the one who has to have watched that videotape and make those decisions.
You know, I think a bit about footage from the Holocaust, and there's often this conversation, isn't there, about it's dehumanizing or we're not honoring the individuals, we're just treating them as, you know, skeletons and bodies, and this is something that we've grappled with for years, and then we have this current enormous challenge. But I think it's a fair question, but an impossible one to really, to be the arbiter, really.
Perhaps the parents have expressed an opinion. And my God, I can't even entertain questions of, can you imagine? We can't imagine.
No.
We can't imagine.
No. Was there a question on this side? Yes, there's a lady here, the second row. Is there a microphone? Thank you. Just here in the second row.
And if you don't mind, just maybe say your name, please. You know, there's a small enough group that we all want to know who's speaking and
Okay,
who
my
we're
name
with.
is Rachel. I wonder how you feel, I know how I feel, about the demonstrations that we have every Saturday, where I don't think it's only Jews who don't feel they can go to London. I don't know anybody who would want to go to London on a Saturday when these demonstrations take place, when you have people who are demonstrating and they don't even know why they're there. When somebody asks them, how do you feel about October the 7th? And they say, I don't know what I was doing on October the 7th. And I just wonder how you feel we are dealing with this, because it's an awful thing. The demonstrations are violent, they're unpleasant, it means you can't go to the centre of London. We had a situation, which I'm sure you've heard of, where somebody was wearing a kippah and they were told, and I understand the police have a difficult situation where they're trying to keep people apart and they don't want added aggravation and added violence. But surely there has to be a point at which you say, you cannot take over a whole country with this. This is not right. Or a whole city like this.
Thank you for that question and that observation. Well, maybe we should just spend more time in shul. That way we don't have to deal with this on Saturday. No, that was a flip answer. I think in the UK, we need to organize politically as well. I think that's the only answer. If you want change, you have to demonstrate that that sense of safety that you want is important enough to you, that you are going to take political risks and spend political time and energy and make clear to MPs that are being elected and other local officials just how important this is to you. Thank God this is a democracy. We do get a voice. We are a small number, but we are powerful, we are smart, we are thoughtful people who can find ways to tell things in compelling ways and create solutions rather than problems. You never know. Sometimes you approach some of these government officials and they actually want to help. They don't know how, they're unsure, because they have 3 or 4 tactical problems that they haven't figured out. How are they going to solve them? We have expertise across our community. I find often that being a solution provider to administration officials is a very constructive way to engage. I don't know what it's going to take for London and for the UK more broadly, but I would think that with some creativity, we can move the needle. I hope.
Was there another question on this side? Is that John? Yeah, sorry. Sorry, the lights. I'm not used to this.
Hi. Yes, I'm John. I guess a more personal question about your father as an educator and as a parent. So in his writings, he's often part of the whole conversation about faith after the Holocaust, and I was really sort of interested to understand, in your experience growing up in his home, how he grappled with his faith and how he communicated that and how he tried to pass on his understanding of Jewish faith to you. And a sort of similar question around him as an educator. You talked about that experience of the conversation. You talked about your experience as a Mohican, leather jacket, kind of rebelling against your parents in some respects. How did he deal with that as a parent? What was his parenting style?
So I'll answer in a couple of parts, but I'll keep it moving. My father, his faith was so challenged and shattered. I don't know that he stopped believing in God, but I think he stopped seeing a purpose in following Jewish ritual, Shabbos, kashrut. I think these things it's not that they lowered in importance to him. I think he felt he was making a conscious decision. God had let him down. He didn't really see why he needed to keep up his end of the bargain. And part of that was, what is the very first mitzvah in Torah? Can anybody tell me what's the very first mitzvah? Somebody shout it out. There are rabbis in the room. Pru or vu, right? Be fruitful and multiply. The very first mitzvah in the Torah is to go have children. And my father had made up his mind to not follow that mitzvah. He felt the world did not deserve any more Jewish children. It took my mother to convince him otherwise, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and his own professor, Shaul Lieberman. So my entire existence hinged on this question of faith for my father. I care a lot about how this went. My father did not want to burden me overly with Holocaust knowledge at an early age, and as I went my own way, he liked to tell a story about the Baal Shem Tov, where a man approaches the Baal Shem Tov and says, my son has gone down all sorts of corners. He's leaving Judaism. He's not doing this. He's not doing that. He seems like a lost soul. Tell me, the best, Rav Baal Shem Tov, what do I do? And the Baal Shem Tov told him, love him more. That's what my father did with me. He loved me more. He was patient. He laid down guardrails. Now, the guardrails that he laid down for me are not necessarily the guardrails I am saying should exist for every Jew. I want to be clear. I am only telling you my direct experience. My father laid down guardrails. He told me that there were only two things he expected from me in life. Number one, he expected that I marry Jewish. He didn't care if it was somebody who would convert into the faith out of love for me or otherwise. He didn't care if it was going to be an Ethiopian Jew with black skin or Sephardi or Ashkenaz, but he wanted to see me marry Jewish so that I could create a Jewish home and ultimately have Jewish grandchildren. And the second thing that he asked me is to say Kaddish for him every day after he passed. And at first, after he passed, I thought, this is the last gift I can give to him, because he taught me that. He said, when you do a mitzvah for the dead, remember, the dead cannot pay you back, so it's the highest form of mitzvah. But actually, I realized it was him giving me the last gift that he could give me.
Okay, yeah, just so I can't really see. There's somebody, yeah, the microphone there. Thank you. Okay, I'll come back to you, Manfred.
I am a rabbi, Rabbi Goldstein, and I got it right, so thank God for that. And thank you for your inspirational talk. And can I also stay with your family home and with you? When you want to get close to your father, is there one particular book you take off the shelf of his that brings you closest to him?
Great
I love
question.
it. Thank you for asking that. Often what I've started doing recently, not that rabbis can ever be boring, but I bring a book with me to shul. Because you never know. You never know if there's going to be, sometimes people are getting, they get to do the Misha Berachs, and sometimes people go on for 10 minutes with all the Misha Berachs they want to give after they get an Aliyah. I pull out a book. I've started bringing my father's books with me for those moments. And I must say, recently, the books that are like top of mind for me, I think Legends of Our Time is one of the lesser known books by my father, but boy, is it powerful. It has unbelievable stories in there. It has the story of my father encountering a Jew from Saragossa who is descended from the Marranos and has been keeping around a scroll passed down for 400 years. It's an unbelievable book. I also very much took a lot of inspiration from my father's books, A Jew Today and One Generation After, particularly after October 7th, as I was searching for the right words to express my Zionism and my belief in the Jewish people in a world that needed to hear words. So I would offer up those three as three books I've been spending a lot of time with recently that have really enriched me. Thank you for asking that question.
Question at the front here, Manfred. Manfred, wait for the microphone. And Manfred will introduce himself.
Thank you. My name is Manfred Goldsberg. I'm a Holocaust survivor. Do you feel that there's any substance to stories, more or less identical, which have reached me from different directions, that in fact some of this turmoil, possibly even a major part, is orchestrated by a powerful paymaster, that a high proportion of these lawless and mindless people are in fact encouraged financially, being paid. Many people are being bussed in every weekend to march, and they're compensated for the time they've spent and for any time they have to take off work. The uprisings which are happening in various universities in America are so close to being identical in every university. The tents which they use for their occupation activities appear to be identical in every university. So many things are happening in like manner, in so many different directions at the same time, that there is someone actively promoting and encouraging what is actually happening, that many of these protesters who seem to have unlimited hatred are in fact being bought in some manner to act as they do.
I do believe, and we've seen this a little bit, because when they started arresting people at some of the campuses, it turned out that not all of these people, in fact, only some of them were actually students. There were many non-students. So it's clear that it's happening. There are a couple of things that I sort of look to, and I try not to get my news just from Twitter. Although I do read Twitter. It's up to the moment. There's a group called FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. They've been doing quite a lot of work on this. And what they have shown is that there is a group that sits above Students for Justice in Palestine. It's one of the prime funders, called AMP, American Muslims for Palestine. And if you look at that group, there is a large degree of overlap between who is in that group and who is leading those efforts with people who were in previous groups that have been shut down and sued because of direct links to Hamas. So it's very clear that some of the organizers are in touch in one way or another, or are maybe one or two steps removed from international forces seeking to do this. I think that there are also, it's very, again, we always need to check facts and make sure, but something started breaking over the last 24 hours that a chain of evidence was emerging, that potentially certain parties in the Chinese Communist Party were sending money to some of these groups that were most active in fomenting some of these protests. And look, that would not surprise me at all, because the Chinese Communist Party is sitting on the biggest genocide currently occurring on the planet. They have 1.8 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps. They are acting with intent in a genocidal fashion, seeking to end the Muslim lifestyle of so many of these people and break up that ethnic minority, spread them around the country, diffuse them, take away any of who they are. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that there are big powers out there that like to be able to foment all the hatred towards Israel, in the same way that there are many Arab non-democracies that are always keen to fan the Arab street, lest their own people become properly focused on their own independence and their own rights. There are definitely big parties out there that would like to see the attention remain on the only Jewish state. Thank you for that question.
Okay, there's a question here in the second row on the right. Thank you.
I'm seeing, I have always been brought up to believe that the English are fair. What is the phenomenon now in England when so many English people are following the Muslims, not realizing that they are really considered infidels, and what they're doing to the Jews, they will in time do to the Christians? I want an explanation for this phenomena. I'm not ashamed of my Judaism. I'm proud of it.
Yeah.
But to display it is to invite hatred. Where do we go from here?
Boy, you've asked almost every hard question all sort of rolled up into one. Why are people choosing to remain ignorant and participate in the modern version of the blood libel, which certainly had its moment in England before?
Indeed.
Why do people ever choose to remain ignorant? The Jews are a convenient scapegoat. It's easier than focusing on one's own problems or missteps. And I don't know, why do they hate us? I have a feeling books have been written on this topic. I don't know that I have some clever, pithy answer for us. I don't know why they hate us, but I'll tell you this. I've reached a point in my own patience where I kind of don't care.
Yes.
Because I'm just going to figure out how to beat them and outmaneuver them, and in any possible sphere and arena that I can, let them be wondering 20 to 30 years from now, why their businesses are bankrupt, why their families are broken. Let them ask those questions, about themselves and how they got there through hating the Jews. I'm kind of done sort of trying to debug them, if you will. I don't know that they are debuggable. I think the best we can do is use the tools we have, use the tools of rational thought and emotion, use the concepts of bringing people closer when there's a window to bring them closer, and use love, and also to show anger at moments in time, and make it clear to people that their behavior is intolerable. In addition to being immoral and unjust, it is intolerable to us, and we have to learn to speak with that voice as well.
Okay, we're going to...
It doesn't have to be a lone voice.
A friend of mine was accosted by two Muslims in St. John's Wood because she was wearing a Star of David, and they abused her. And she said to the policeman, "What are you going to do about this?" "Nothing," he said. "We allow free speech."
Well, then maybe it's time, and that is tragic, and there are many things we could do in response to it, but maybe it's time for volunteer forces, volunteer security forces. In the United States, we have something called CSS, where it's, Jewish trained volunteer. You have something like that here as well?
Community Security Trust.
So it may be the case that, these institutions require more funding and development, and that the next sort of check to write is in their direction. I don't know. But I would say that if the police aren't going to take care of us, we need to do it on our own. And that's not an invitation that people should start carrying guns, God forbid. But we should organize in groups. And if people need to be walked home from shul along certain routes, we need to prepare for that and allow for people to be walked home from shul on Shabbos, in peace and security.
Right. Any further questions? Anyone at the back?
Any great answers? Sorry, before we move on, I'm sorry, do you mind?
Go on.
Does anybody have any other great answers? Because I don't feel like I have the right answers. Any other ideas in response to this question?
Thank you for your inspirational thoughts and encouraging us to be more proactive. The late Chief Rabbi, Rabbi Sachs, said, "The Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. The victim cannot cure the crime." Do you think that Jews should be mixing socially more with the wider community, and that more non-Jews should be empowered to fight our cause? Because if a non-Jewish person defends Israel, it's a far more potent voice than a Jew defending Israel or a Jew speaking out against anti-Semitism, because people might say, well, a Jew would stick up for Israel, or a Jew would talk out about anti-Semitism. But if a non-Jew says it, I think it's worth 1,000 voices. And I think the solution would be if we could educate more non-Jews to understand our problem, so they had the knowledge to speak up for us, because there's too much silence.
I love the thinking, and thank you for being constructive and offering an idea. Thank you. I want to respond to that if I can briefly. The Jewish people have survived as long as we have because we dance an incredibly intricate dance between the particular and the universal, which is where we started this conversation. It's a dance that my father deeply loved. We have survived by being internally focused enough that we keep forms of prayer and study and language that go back thousands of years. When the Uyghur Muslims, who I'm very engaged with, talk to us, one of the things they want to know the most, they're thinking about, could they politically defeat China or move the needle through boycotts? But their real question for me is, how did you do it? How did you keep your culture alive for thousands of years? So we know how to dance on the inside. And you know what? We also know how to dance with external partners, because we stand for the opposite of that zero-sum game, making every society richer that we engage in. So of course, We have close friends in the non-Jewish community. Of course, one could argue that in many ways this is an incredible blessing of interfaith marriages, that they have extended us, in the world. Yes, there's a risk of assimilation, but there's also a blessing that comes with it of reaching new people and new families, because I would say rather than thinking about arming people on how to defeat our problem, let's not take them straight to the problem. One has the energy to defeat a problem if one is supportive and believes in the cause, and if one is supportive and believes in the people. Let's bring our non-Jewish friends to Shabbos dinner. And let's have a richer and more meaningful Shabbos dinner than we had before. If you only used to say the bracha on the candles, then maybe make Kiddush as well. If you're already making Kiddush, maybe sing Shalom Aleichem. If you're already singing Shalom Aleichem, maybe sing Eshes Chayil to your wife and the women in your life, celebrating everything that they bring to our holy people. And if you do that, maybe think about benching with your kids, actually teaching them the Birkat HaMazon if they don't know it, and making a joyful end in song at the end of your evening. People who experience us being in love with our own faith and our ancestors and the belief in the future of what we have will feel inspired to be closer to us because we have lessons to teach the world in how we behave and what we do. And that is the reason they should ally with us, not because we have a problem. They should be with us because of who we are and what we bring.
Okay, I'm very mindful of time and we're not going to get through everybody in the audience. I'm warning you now. I can see there's somebody, sorry, where am I putting, there, yes, thank you. And then there was also somebody over here who had their hand up. I think that's going to be it, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Ben Black. I was just keen to hear the Moynihan Station incident that you referred to. It sounded like we were going to get to it and then we didn't get to it.
Good point.
Just very, very quickly, you can find it on Twitter if you just search for like Elisha Wiesel, Israeli flag. Ever since October 7th, one thing that did change, I started going everywhere with an Israeli flag in my backpack. Just in case. And here is a moment where it came in handy, because all of a sudden there were, I was in Moynihan Station I was taking a train upstate to go skiing with my son, my 18-year-old son, and all of a sudden we were overwhelmed. Hundreds and hundreds of anti-Israel, I don't call them pro-Palestinian, just footnote. I don't believe that these people are exclusively pro-Palestinian. I'm pro-Palestinian. I would love to see a government emerge and a drift emerge within that society that believes that they can actually stand up a society not based on hatred, but based on partnership. I would love to see that emerge. I'm pro-Palestinian, but these people are anti-Israel and they're anti-Semitic, and they walked in, marched in, took over the whole station, 100 cops chasing after them, screaming, globalize the Intifada, screaming from the river to the sea, calling for ethnic cleansing of my people. And when I saw that, I said, I was on the phone actually with a member of the Yale Board of Trustees who I was trying to convince that anti-Semitism was a problem on campus. I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to call you back. And I sort of hung up the phone and I took out the Israeli flag and I put it on. And of course, I immediately attracted negative attention. And sure enough, the cops came over to me and they said, you know what, you might need to take that off. This isn't helping here. And then they finally said, look, we don't have the situation fully in control. We don't want people to get hurt. We really are asking you. We can't force you, but we need you to take it off. I listened to it, and my big takeaway from that whole thing is New York City has a crazy law that you can go to these things wearing masks. Didn't used to be the case, but Letitia James put it in place during COVID. I became convinced that this masking thing is just an excuse for the rabid crowd to hide behind hate, and it's time for that to end.
Yeah. There was a question here.
My name is Chaim Bitwan. I fought the Israeli independent war. My question is how, with all the organization that we have in Israel, which is called Shabak, I assume that you know what it means, Shabak?
Yep.
How is it possible that Hamas, on the 7th of October, managed to get to the achievement, what they've done with such a success, with Israel being so unprepared?
It's the worst. There's no good answers. You hear stories of how women commanders were overruled, which breaks my heart. If sexism has a role to play here, shame on us. There's no good answer. And we could talk for easily 3 hours about Israeli politics and what can or should change over there. But my God, what a terrible moment. There's a phrase, you had one job to do, you know? We had one job to do and we didn't do it.
I'm squeezing in one more question. There was a lady over here. Just have the microphone just at the end. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Mintzberg. I'm second generation. My mom was 4, well, 1 to 4, but in Hungary, very young, but still second generation. My initial question was how you feel walking around New York with Magen David on, but you sort of answered that.
I feel great.
Talking about wearing the flag. So good final question, but what I wanted to ask is if you could take one lesson to pass on from your dad in sort of a summary of who he was as a person, because obviously we can read the books and get what we get out of it, but especially in light of what's happening now, if you had one lesson that you would want to pass on, one lesson that you took from him as sort of the key, but one that you'd pass on to us, what would that be?
My father loved being Jewish, and he loved being alive. He went through such darkness, and yet he came out with such hope. I never saw my father waste a minute. He so keenly felt the value of life, the value of time, and the value of being Jewish. He loved it. He really, really loved it. And if I could send one message maybe to all of you to take away is, we have what to be angry about. We also have what to be sad about. We have a tremendous amount to be joyful about. And joy is what our kids are going to see. And joy is what will sustain us for generations to come. So if you can feel that joy and access it and show it in your being Jewish, in your being alive, that will make your kids want to learn more about where they come from and where they're going than anything you ask of them or tell them to do.
Well, that's an incredibly powerful way to end our conversation, and what an amazing opportunity for all of us.
But it's your almost birthday, so
No, we're not going to say
no. But but there's a tradition,
Right.
you know, in certain Hasidic circles that you have great mystical powers on your almost birthday.
Right.
So with these almost mystical powers on your almost birthday, I would like to ask you to close this for us and maybe make a bracha for all of us.
Well, I prepared one earlier. No, actually, I would say, I don't know about bracha, but what I would say is this, and I really believe this. I think that we will get through this, and I think that this will pass. And I tell you why I say that, not just because of our strength and our resilience, and because we have everybody here has the agency to make a difference, and you've given us that inspiration and reminded us. But I also say it because I see our survivors of the Holocaust sitting here on the front row, and survivors that I know and who've inspired me so much, and their message has very much echoed yours. They are life-affirming.
Other way around, I echo them, to be clear.
Life-affirming, a zest for life, a reminder to not waste any minute. And I actually would say that we haven't wasted 1 minute listening to you this evening.
Oh, okay.
And we're not going to waste any minutes in the future. So thank you. I'm passing on to Ray to conclude, but thank all of you
Thanks
as well.
to all of you. Amazing.
Absolutely incredible. And your final words before about joy is so much about what we are about at JW3. Yes, we hold pain. Yes, we focus on the issues that trouble us, but we provide a space for people to come and celebrate being Jewish, to engage in their Judaism, to double down, to learn more, to think more. And I think everyone in this room, so many people here come here regularly, that's why they come here. And I'm reminded of the words on this stage about 8-9 years ago of the great historian and educator Deborah Lipstadt, who, as many people know, is the US Special Envoy on Antisemitism, and to use her great phrase that she said, that many of you must have heard her say before, which was, we need to focus on less oi and more joy. So I just want to thank you, Karen.
My father used to say, where there's a oi, there's a ve.
Next time I'm doing something, I'm going to be quoting you, quoting him, saying that. This was a really incredible conversation. And it's also, like any event here, I don't want this to be a conversation that has a start and an end when you leave the room. I want this to be a trigger for your conversations between you and the conversations you take out. So one of the things to say is that the cafe, when you go down the end of the corridor, is still open. If you're not in a rush, get a drink, sit with someone you know, sit with someone you don't know that's been in this room, and carry on those conversations before you rush off. Don't let it just sort of linger in the hall and fall on the floor. Those of you that are particularly interested in Israel and the ongoing situation, every single Friday for the last 7 months, we've put on a free event at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's online. All you have to do is go to our website and look for Israel Briefing. You just have to register and you'll get the link. It just keeps it a bit more secure. 9 o'clock every Friday morning. Each time it's someone different in Israel, an academic, an expert, a journalist, for half an hour giving a briefing, and then you have a chance to ask questions. We thought it would be for a few weeks. We never imagined it would be for 7 months. I just wanted to mention it because tomorrow morning we've got Jonathan Cummings, originally of this parish, Jonah Cummings, who's a former advisor to President Reuven Rivlin, amongst his many other roles. It's going to be really interesting. So if you want to hear the latest on the ground, what's going on in Israel, sign up and tune in. The other thing I want to say is, this isn't a shameless plug, even if it sounds like it. But one of the many reasons I asked Karen to come and do this tonight, apart from the brilliant work that she's done for more years than I won't embarrass her and say how many years she's been doing it. But earlier this year, we recorded a conversation as a podcast, part of the podcast with Dr. Jonathan Boyd, the CEO of JPR, Jewish Policy Research Institute, and JW3. We launched a podcast called Jews Do Count. I'll let that sink in just for a second. Yeah, that's the reaction. Jews Do Count. And one of the episodes was called something like We're Fed Up of Talking About Antisemitism. And it was a conversation that we originally recorded in September. And then October 7th happened and we scrapped it and we re-recorded it a few months ago and put it out. And it had the most remarkable reaction. So if you want to hear that conversation, which just really gets to the heart of some of these issues, you can find it wherever you get your podcast. Just look up Jews Do Count. And I say it because Karen is just brilliant in that conversation. So it's worth tuning in. You can forward past me. You can forward past John even, but just listen to Karen. I'm going to ask you to allow Karen and Elisha, if they want to leave the stage, to a round of applause. And thank you very much and good night.
Thank you. You're so brilliant.
You're amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Watching the time.
Are we leaving the room? We're leaving the room.